Welcome to Changing Course, a podcast where we explore how people navigate change and find their balance afterwards. I'm your host, Maya Adam, and if you're a parent, you likely already know our guest, KJ Dell'Antonia, from her time as editor of the New York Times Motherlode blog, which later became part of their Well Family section. KJ also started her own podcast, and she's the author of several incredibly popular books, How to Be a Happier Parent, In Her Boots, and the New York Times bestseller, The Chicken Sisters. She lives with her family on a small farm in New Hampshire, and I'm just so thrilled to welcome her to the show today. Welcome, KJ.
Thank you so much for having me. I think we're going to have a really good time.
Lovely. And KJ, I have to tell you, I'm a parent of 3 kids, and you were like a guide for me in those early days when I had no idea what I was doing. I still have no idea, but I just want you to know that you really have helped a lot of us be better parents. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That is great to hear. You're catching me at sort of an odd parenting moment, which is, my kids they're all teenagers and a couple of them are in college now, but I was helping one of my younger children with a college essay yesterday, and she needed to know some things from her like deep past. Mm-hmm. And I went back and was reading, it was a memoir that I was working on in 2011. So that's a really long time ago. Yeah. And because she wanted to know, she had some speech challenges, and she wanted to remember like what her speech patterns had been. And I was like, oh, I know I wrote dialogue in this. So I pulled it out and was reading it. And that even predates my Motherload days. And it was all about, this particular child is adoptive, and it was about the transition to bringing her into the family. And it's that I eventually didn't do anything with the memoir because that's such a fraught position to be in anyway. I decided that was for her and for me. So now she wants to read it. So I was rereading it. So I'm kind of like sort of back in the throes of early parenting. And it was a weird place to be, man.
Yeah. KJ, tell me a bit about let's start going back a little bit since we've gone there already. How did you start the Motherload? And was that a scary thing to put yourself out there like that?
So I didn't start the Motherload. Lisa Belkin did. So okay. The story of the Motherload is, the New York Times discovers blogs. It's probably somewhat late, as the New York Times is wont to do. And Lisa agrees to start a parenting blog. And it's a blog back then. And what she used to do was go to people's blogs. This is, and invite them to let her share one of their blog entries on the Times. And then it became very popular. And when Lisa decided to move and go to HuffPo, this is like, it's such a very particular conversation to a very particular time in journalism. When she decided to go, I had been with Slate. So I had been writing for Slate about parenting and culture and the politics that surround parenting, because it is, there's a lot of politics and societal influence on our parenting, right? So I had been covering that for Slate. So I was really probably the only person out there besides Lisa writing about parenting from a non-personal angle, for a fairly major outlet. And so when I knew that Lisa was leaving, I wrote the editor at the Times and I said, hey, you should hire me. And this was one of the 2 best phone calls I've ever gotten in my entire life, because I knew Lisa was leaving. Lisa's leaving turned out to be a little bit of a tense issue with the Times. And so they asked her to leave rather quickly once they realized she was going to a competitor. And so I got a call from the editor, Megan. She said, listen, I literally need somebody to start doing this like tomorrow. Will you do it? And I said, yes, of course. And then I called Slate and I was like, guess what? I'm not going to be doing your thing for a little while. And Megan was like, I was auditioning. She said, we have to go through it. I said, well, I'll absolutely fill in, but you have to understand that I also want the job. And so I did it for, I think, 2 weeks, and a couple of other people did it for a week at a time and a week at a time. And the whole time they were doing it, I would write Megan and be like, wow, that thing that so-and-so did was really good. You know what I would have done? I mean, because this is a very competitive thing to be going for.
Yeah.
So eventually I did get the job, obviously.
Amazing. KJ, you said it was one of the 2 best phone calls. What was the other one?
The phone call from my editor telling me that The Chicken Sisters was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Those were both really amazing phone call moments in my life.
Unbelievable. Well, you've certainly, made a splash. It's quite amazing how you've, the reach you've had, and every parent I talk to has read your work and read your books, and you've somehow influenced the way they handle instability and kind of the uncertainty that comes with parenting. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought to have you on this podcast, Changing Course, because I think right now, more than ever, in this kind of post-pandemic, uncertain world, I feel like people are reevaluating their lives and their priorities, and they're trying so hard to reestablish a sense of stability. And I think that's causing them in many ways to kind of struggle to be engaged at work and to find their balance outside of work. So I wanted to start with one of my questions to you. How has this whole experience of the pandemic changed your life, and how are you coping with this post-pandemic era?
Man, it's really, it's changed a lot for all of us. And one of the things that I find very interesting, so I wrote How to Be a Happier Parent. I think I wrote it in 2017 and it was published in 2018 as these things work. And a big piece, a lot of it came from, as the editor of Motherload, I both wrote and I edited. So I read literally thousands of essays from parents. And what I had observed was that we were all really leaning into the hard and painful and stressful part of parenting. We were really feeling the worries and the fears and if I don't do this, if I don't do that, things are all going to go wrong. And so a lot of How to Be a Happier Parent was geared towards that feeling of running all the time. There's some lining in it when I was every morning my husband and I get up and we put on our skates and we never stop until the end of the day, and then we just collapse into bed and argue about whose day was worse. That was so the thing about the pandemic that it does tie in. I think it made a lot of us see that in our lives and go, man, I don't want that, because it was, as much as I wrote entire chapters on your kids really don't have to do all the activities and learning that in our family we could only handle X. Now I have 4 kids, but even that wasn't just me, that the kids could only handle so much, that kids needed their free time, that they need. Well, I mean, the pandemic was awful and I lost people right away and I'm not in it, but it also really, slammed to a stop all of that chaotic, manic energy, because we had to stay home and we couldn't. And I think a lot of us really realized, here are the things that I miss terribly, and here are the things that I don't miss all.
Yeah.
And I know that I have really, the things that I don't miss at all turned out not to matter very much. And it's been much easier for me to focus especially on the people that are really important to me, and to worry a lot less about I am the parent. All my kids play hockey and I would be the parent in the stands with the book, and that's not done. I don't care. I literally was sitting in the stands yesterday because we were at a summer thing, and my husband was very into the action because it's a long and complicated and not particularly interesting hockey related story, and I had a book I was finishing. I'm just I don't care what the other parents think of that anymore, because I'm a hockey parent to some extent. I know what's going on and I really love it. And I love that my kids love it, but I don't need to watch them all the time. And this was one of those circumstances where I only had to be there for like logistical reasons. If my kid was out there playing because I'm watching, that would be a problem for both of us. So
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the pandemic helped a lot of us to see that. And I know it helped me.
Amazing. Somebody said, I think it might have been you. Somebody wrote, was it you, KJ, who wrote that it's pretty bizarre that we spend so much of our parenting years watching our kids do stuff. And imagine if the tables were turned and they watched us kind of sit at our desk and do the ironing. It just seems so bizarre, the ratio of...
Yeah. I don't know if that was me. I've written things along those lines, but I don't know about you, but I remember my parents were tennis players. Mm-hmm. And I was an only child, and they would take me to this indoor court. And I just remember sort of wandering through the curtains that separated and like looking for loose balls and being bored and reading a book. And I remember the smell. And then I remember the outdoor courts where they used to. So I did spend my childhood. Certainly wasn't watching them play, but I did spend my childhood like that. And we don't do that to our kids, right? We would feel, you can't just leave your child wandering the indoor tennis courts. People would arrest you, and also your child needs to be stimulated. We see things differently, and some of that is good and some of it is bad.
Right. Absolutely. So KJ, just to switch gears a little bit here, when you were kind of building your career and designing your life, and you have this pretty remarkable balance, at least it seems that way from the outside, of kind of living in an idyllic, what some people would consider an idyllic kind of farm existence with your 4 kids, and then also having this incredibly prolific career as a writer. At what point did you sort of make decisions, career changes that got you where you are today? And how did you recognize those signs that it was time to pivot?
So, I mean, with respect to the idyllic, you are right. I mean, things have fallen very well for me. And so we have a rule on the #MWriting podcast, is just that you're not allowed to say you got lucky. You can say, I worked hard and I got lucky. And both of those things are true. So I did. I worked really hard to set myself up the way that we have. And things worked out. You can't. And I had babysitting and I had help. And I never pretend that I didn't. And I have a very supportive partner who has a fantastic career of his own. So that enables a great deal of, our ability to live on a farm. And it's also why we live on a farm in rural New Hampshire, when frankly, my preference, at least when I was much younger, would have been to stay in Manhattan. So some of the farm in rural New Hampshire is like, there's some compromise involved in that. But so before I started writing, I went to law school, and I had 7 different lawyer jobs because I was not particularly well suited to being a lawyer, although some of them were pretty dang impressive. I was that kid who got all the scores and did all the things. I was also from Kansas, which made me different. And, so I was, because now I'm watching my own kids do all this, and I can see the ways that things worked for me. So, once I decided to stop being a lawyer and throw myself at writing, I really went at it in the same way that I would go at deciding to become a lawyer, your average sort of gold star getting ladder climbing career. I had a list of magazines and publications that I wanted to conquer. I read books about how to do it. I looked at other people's careers that I wanted to follow, and I went back early in their career and figured out what they'd done and how I could duplicate it. That's all a little harder now because the world has changed so much, but it's not impossible. So there was a lot of serendipity in what's worked out for me, but there was also a lot of intentionality here. And I could see a life in which I became a writer for our local paper. And I love our local paper. And there are some great people that write for it. Wasn't what I wanted. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a thing for the local paper. And then I used it to write a thing for a bigger paper. And then I just kept, and I would pay attention to what it was that the outlets or the magazines or what they wanted. I didn't worry so much about what I wanted to write. I worried about what they wanted, what they needed to publish. And that, that worked. So how did I know when it was time? I would say a lot of this was not so much my making a pivot as it was my determinedly stomping my way towards bigger and bigger publications or bylines.
When you changed, because you were, practicing law, and then you, at some point, you made a decision. Did that happen gradually? Did things get so unbearable that you had to change? Or was it like you saw the canary in the coal mine and you thought, I'm going to start planning an exit route here?
So I would say, and this is funny that you asked this. So I have rooted myself out of many, many, many jobs. But the actual leaving the law to become a writer was both me planning a tentative way to leave and then me getting kicked out. And something similar happens when I switch from being a journalist to fiction. So I have the dream and I have the plan, but it does require a little extra. I needed a push. So in the case of leaving the law, the push was twofold. I got laid off. It turns out, so this is 2001, when really, if you were standing on the street corner and holding still, someone might make you the vice president of business development for an internet startup. And that's pretty much what happened to me. I am the worst vice president of business development ever. I was not good at that. I got laid off because 9/11, financial crash, all of those things. I got laid off right after 9/11, right after I'd had a baby. And that had nothing. I just remember having a conversation with my boss and being like, I know this isn't about the baby. Don't worry. Like, I'm not, I'm so not gonna, like, I couldn't do what I'm not sure anybody could vice president of business development in September of 2001. But anyway, so now I'm booted, right? And I have this baby. And you've obviously had babies. They are really inconvenient. They are wailing, inconvenient sacks of flour that you have to carry around all the time. Half the time they're attached to you, which is not a professional look. And at the same time, my husband also needed to switch jobs, and he also received a bit of a push, which that's his story. But so we end up in rural New Hampshire because he gets a job and I've got this sack of flour screaming baby thing. And we've agreed, like, I always wanted to be a writer. I always planned to leave and start writing. I probably wouldn't have done it in that moment, in part because the idea that having the baby also would mean I'd left the workforce didn't sit well with me. I didn't want to be that person, but I also didn't want to go back to the workforce. Like, I didn't like it before I had the screaming baby. So, and I always wanted to do the writing. So my husband and I, we really agreed that we would move. We would get the same kind of babysitting that we would get if I had a full-time job, and I would throw myself at the freelancing. And I don't even think we gave it a timeline. We didn't end up needing to. I was pretty fast.
Amazing. So, I mean, that's fascinating to me because what you've said there is a pearl. Like, you have to have a plan almost in anticipation of one never knows when that push might come. And having a plan is sort of a safety. You always have something that could be your new passion if the current one doesn't work for some reason, right?
And I would say I always have a plan, which is just maybe me. I'm just a person who always has a plan. And the thing that I find most stressful in life is when you can't have a plan because there are so many things up in the air. And then I just make a lot of plans. But so I had a plan and I needed a push and I got the push. And
amazing.
And the same, a not dissimilar thing happened when I left the Times to move into fiction. I had wanted to write fiction really the whole time that I was being a journalist. I wanted to write fiction. I didn't feel like I was quite ready. It's funny because you'll meet writers who will say, well, I can write fiction, but nonfiction, that would be really hard. And then you meet writers who say, well, I can write nonfiction, but fiction, that would be really hard. So I was of the nonfiction I can do, because there's more of a program for, you can almost build a lawyery career out of nonfiction. Whereas fiction is really just, you got to write it and then you got to throw it at the wall. So the job at the Times really was the best job. It's a full-time, high-profile, impressive job that you can take to parties in Manhattan. People who didn't want to give me the time of day when I left the law were suddenly interested, because that's, my first law firm, which was somewhat less than proud of me as I descended down the ladder of legal jobs, had come back and said, oh, you're one of our favorite alumni. And I'm like, great, thanks. Which was fun. And I loved it and appreciated it. So it was a great job. And I could live here, right? It was super flexible. But on the other hand, it was work from home before work from home was cool. It's a very political place, the Times. You really had to have your team and your alliances made. It's very complex. I think the best places to work are also often the worst places to work. And it was kind of that. Yeah. And eventually I found myself, as the column and everything else changed, I found myself in a position where I was being asked to write stuff that I didn't want to write. I'm not a health journalist. And when we moved the parenting section into the Well, it became much more health focused. It's since shifted, because that's what things do. They shift, right? So it's since shifted back, and it's wonderful again now. But there was a time when it was really moving towards health journalism, and I was being encouraged and supported to move into that role, but it just wasn't for me. So at that point, I had taken a book leave to write How to Be a Happier Parent. I ended up with a chunk of it left because I finished, and that's when I started working on the Chicken Sisters. And then so I kind of, again, there was a push.
There was a push and a plan. I love it.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're going to call this episode.
A push and a plan. Always have a plan in case you get pushed.
Right? KJ, I don't think I ever told you this, but before I studied medicine, I was a ballerina for 10 years. And I was taking online courses in anatomy while I was dancing, just in case I ever got pushed. And of course, a push came after 10 years. I was sick for a week, and I came back, and all of my parts had been given to other dancers. We're very replaceable as ballerinas. And I suddenly had nothing to dance. And that was my push. I was like, I'm 27 and it's time to go to college and have a new career. And so I totally hear you about that push and a plan thing. And I think that's really valuable for people. Okay, can I switch course a little bit here and ask you about a different kind of change? Unexpected changes, like things that kind of hit you from out of nowhere. They come your way. Everybody has them in life. Do you have advice for people on how to deal with that kind of change?
That's like my worst thing.
Yeah.
and because it's really hard. I hardly ever talk about this, but I guess I will. So I had a cancer diagnosis in 2019. I'm obviously fine. But it was not fun and not pretty. And I had to go through, it was breast cancer and treatment. But there's also that period where you don't know what kind of breast cancer it was. And it was the better kind, but not the best kind. And I've sort of blocked all of that out. But there's definitely, there's that. And then there's the moment when you get the phone call about a family member, or there's the getting fired before you have a plan, because it is completely unexpected, which I happen to have seen mine coming. But sometimes you don't, right? Sometimes you get sick and you come back, and you were ready, but I don't know that you saw it coming. And there you are, right? And it's just the worst feeling, because it's both everything has been yanked out from under me and everything I planned around that is now dust. And I can say that if you can build into your life a certain level of resilience. So if you're listening to this now and you haven't had the rug yanked out from under, I mean, I have friends that have also had their rug yanked out from under them by spousal infidelity lately. And that's a really, because it destroys both your present and in some ways your past.
Yeah.
Because nothing is as you expected it to be or as you thought it was. So, but on the other hand, you don't need to like wander through life right now thinking, okay, what will I do if, my suddenly just, that would be awful. Like that's just borrowing trouble. We don't want to do that. But when I was writing How to Be a Happier Parent, I was studying a lot of the neurology of building resilience. It was Angela Duckworth. It was, there's a man and I never get his name right. It's Ken. You probably know him.
An educator?
No, he's a neurologist, actually. So he's a neurologist, and he wrote about basically it's strengthening the happy circuits in your brain. And I could literally go and find the book, and I will send it to you, and you can put it in your show notes. But his point was that if you spend more time focusing on good things, that you're strengthening your ability to focus on good things so that when bad things happen and really slam into you, it's not like you can sort of float off to a happy place, but you've strengthened your ability to focus on small, brief, good things. Because even so, there's another writer, and again, I'm just a little unprepared because I'm a little out of the happiness world at the moment. But she had, and you'll probably recognize her. So she had a stroke, and half of her, she had a stroke, but she was quite young. And she wrote about the difference between, she decided at some point, she was like, I could either throw myself at the treatment and like sort of become a professional sick person and that's a valid thing to do. But instead, she decided to sort of only focus on her illness for X time a day. And the rest of the time she would do the thing that she would watch a favorite TV show and have I think probably an alcoholic drink. I don't remember, but at night she would still do the things that she enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And she decided just when she was doing the things that she enjoyed to lean on the things that she enjoyed. So what I'm saying, I think, is that when I found myself yanked out of my regular world to deal with this illness, which I was not at all happy about, I both said, okay, learn about illness, figure out what I can do, make plan, because I am a make plan person. And also, let's make some fun plans. Yeah. So, let's plan something that I will enjoy. And so it's a funny thing because I think we think it's a little offensive to suggest to someone who's going through a really hard time that they find something you enjoy. Mm-hmm. But if you are the person, you're still yourself. Like you're still your person. So even if you're suddenly dealing with, spousal infidelity and your life is falling apart and trying to figure out your bank accounts and who's going to help and I happen to have a friend who's dealing with all of this right now. She still wants to take her dog for a walk and, talk it over with a friend, but then say, okay, that's enough of that. Now let's talk about, what our kids are doing or this movie that we've seen or whatever. And so to keep that part of your life, to find some part of your life that you can keep positive, that you can find some joy in, I think is really helpful.
I love it. So put limits around it and practice those pathways those positive pathways so that they stay open when the times are better, right? Yeah, that makes sense to me. We had in the, more than maybe a year and a half ago, I had the rug pulled out from under me when one of our kids was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I had exactly the same experience of what you're talking about, where at first it was kind of like, I thought I couldn't breathe for a little bit, as if I'd kind of had the wind knocked out of me. And then as I started to go about my regular things that I enjoy, my exercise and stuff like that, I kind of used those moments when I felt strong to overcome what was going on with this child. And I feel like what you're saying is very powerful. It gave me a way of compartmentalizing it and saying, okay, kind of anything that we can cope with is not death. And so it could be worse, and let's put it in its place and let's go on. And now 18 months later, everybody's time is incredibly powerful in dealing with these things, right?
Yes, they become a part of your life instead of the focus of your life. A writer that I love, and this one I can remember her name, Sarah Suzanka, she's very much a Buddhist, although she doesn't really claim that. And she had this, I would call it a mantra, which was, right now, at this moment, there is nothing wrong. And when you get the cancer diagnosis, when you get the diabetes notice, when your husband, and I don't know about when your husband's becoming with that one, because right now at that moment, something is wrong. But also, like, there is right now you're standing in the yard, the sun is shining or the rain is falling, but the flowers are growing, I guess. Right now, at this moment, there is nothing wrong. And I go back and I lean on that a lot. And I think if the pandemic gave us anything, and it gave us a lot, along with taking away a lot, I think that whole sort of "we can do hard things" that was kind of a slogan, I think that's really good and really true. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying, which is that even when everything is wrong, or everything around you is going wrong, there are parts of your life that stay the same. And I have found this in reading about people who are in war zones, and reading about people having really terrible experience, because that's fortunately for me, the only way I'm going to know about a war zone yet is to read things that other people have written about it. That some parts of life stay good. Like, you're still, if you're in World War II, you're still having tea at 5:00. You're waiting for the bombs later. And it's sort of fascinating. And I always used to read that and think, well, is that really true? Like, does part of your life stay the same? Like, does part of you stay happy even though, or can it? And I think one of the things we learned during the pandemic is that, even when things were as scary as they could be, and we went through that, like, they were really scary. Now I think we look back and we're like, it wasn't that bad, but it was terrifying. We didn't know what it was going to be like. And even then we were able, I think, to find some pockets of joy. So I would hope that maybe as a collective generation and multi-generations, we come away with that.
That's beautiful, KJ. So powerful. I have one last question for you. I know we're almost out of time. If you had, and this is a big one, so take your time with it. If you had to leave our listeners with some advice for how they are to kind of find their balance, their equilibrium again today, what would that advice be?
I would say, I would come back to what I said as we started our conversation about what were the things that you missed and what were the things that you didn't, and really focus on giving yourself more of the things that you missed. So in my case, I'm pretty extroverted, but I had gotten to a point with 4 kids and all the activities and all the school functions and all of the like, it was like every day was filled with people that weren't necessarily the people I would have chosen to be with.
Yeah.
But then when all of that was taken away, I realized that I should seek out more time with the people I would choose to be with. And B, I actually did miss interacting with strangers, and I missed small talk. And so finding ways to work that back in has been really important to me. And So yeah, I think that would be if I can put it in a little nutshell, that would be it. Find ways to get more of what you missed and less of what you didn't.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, what incredible lessons. I mean, I look forward to actually going back and listening to this again, because I think you gave us some real pearls of wisdom. And I know that you've helped a lot of people today with this advice. So I want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody, all of our audience members. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm Maya Adam, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Changing Course with the incredible KJ Dell'Antonia. We'll be back in the weeks ahead with more fascinating guests, and we'll continue to explore how inspiring people navigate change.